What is poppin' YouTube? Today we are doing my week 6 must start, must sit wide receivers. It's crazy that we're already in week 6. We're doing a little bit different format today, so let me know how you like it. Hope it helps. Let me know any start sit questions down below in the comments. Hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and let's go. So when we are talking today, we're going to be giving you the start sit wide receivers, but we're going to be doing them in the tier list. The first player in our tier list is going to be Tyreek Hill, as Tyreek Hill goes up against the Carolina Panthers. Tyreek Hill's been averaging 22.9 fantasy points per game in half PPR. Absolutely insane monster. He's in the S tier, playing a great matchup versus Carolina. No reason to harp any longer on Tyreek Hill. Moving on to my A tier, we have quite a few guys. We have Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, AJ Brown, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Assuming Amon-Ra St. Brown plays. I know there's some debate on if Amon-Ra St. Brown is even going to play with that oblique hernia type injury, but Jamar Chase is going up against the Seattle Seahawks. 17.6 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in half PPR. It hasn't been great, but last week absolutely emerged, so have to have him as a wide receiver too, especially with no Justin Jefferson. Stephon Diggs versus the New York Giants, the New York football Giants, who cannot seem to play any defense. Welcome to going up against Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. It's going to be an absolute bloodbath for the New York Giants this week. Have him as my wide receiver 3. Devontae Adams versus New England, 16.1 fantasy points per game he's been averaging in half PPR. My man wasn't getting the targets last week. Really needs to get the targets going. Cooper Kupp as my next player here in the tier versus Arizona. 15.8 fantasy points in that first game that he played last week in half PPR. I mean, the target share was there. Absolutely dominated with the target share. So that's what's exciting about Cooper Kupp. How's that going to play with him and Puka Nacua? We shall see. Moving on to Keenan Allen versus the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the Dallas Cowboys matchup, the spread's pretty even for the Cowboys versus the Chargers. But let's be clear. If the Cowboys can't score any offense, this game's going to be over by halftime. So Keenan Allen, I like him. 21.4 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in half PPR. He's been absolutely a monster. It's hard for me to really put him over Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, anything like that, just based on that. But you have Keenan Allen, you're starting him. AJ Brown going up against the New York Jets. AJ Brown finally got it clicking with Jalen Hurts this last week. The Eagles are favored by 7+ fantasy points, so you definitely got to go get AJ Brown starting. And then, of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Tampa Bay, 14.1. Moving on to our second tier, we have DJ Moore, Puka Nacua, Calvin Ridley, and CeeDee Lamb. DJ Moore is coming off of an impressive 48 fantasy point game in half PPR. In full PPR, it was like 55. Dude was an absolute monster. 19.3 fantasy points is now what his average is because, of course, this last week absolutely ballooned his average up. If the Chicago Bears offense can stay hot, we absolutely love seeing what DJ Moore can be, so we love having him in our tier. The next player we're going to be talking about is Puka Nacua, the wide receiver 2 now on the Rams. A lot of us were worried, well, what's going to happen with Puka Nacua once Cooper Kupp comes back? Well, what happened is Puka Nacua slides into the Robert Woods role, which is still going to be a top 10 wide receiver on a weekly basis, on a points per game basis, so no need to be concerned about Puka Nacua. Of course, Cooper Kupp, elite level upside, but shout out to us who got Puka Nacua because the ride stays hot, the roller coaster stays running. No reason not to have Puka Nacua any lower than this. Then we move on to Calvin Ridley, and we've been a big Calvin Ridley channel. We've been really big proponents of Calvin Ridley, and he's kind of just been the last few weeks, but 11.5 fantasy points in half PPR is what he's averaging, going up against the Indianapolis Colts this week without Anthony Richardson. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to get a win, and let's not forget, it was against the Colts when Calvin Ridley had that really, really big half of football, and so if Calvin Ridley, instead of just having one big half of football, he can have 2 big halves of football. I really like Calvin Ridley here as a wide receiver 1, and rounding out my wide receiver 1s for this week in the B tier is going to be CeeDee Lamb. Hear me out. CeeDee Lamb, you drafted him, hasn't been great. Really has not been great. But 11.5 fantasy points in half PPR is what he's averaging. They're going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. Can Dak cook? I kind of doubt it, but I still think CeeDee Lamb can have an okay day. I can't push him any further. We're talking about CeeDee Lamb, elite level wide receiver. You drafted him. You're not sitting him. You're just praying for better days ahead for our guy, CeeDee Lamb. Now let's move on to our C tier. We have Brandon Ayuk, Devontae Smith, Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, and Nico Collins. We have Brandon Ayuk versus Cleveland. Cleveland's not going to have Deshaun Watson. They're absolutely going to get steamrolled because the offense isn't going to be able to contribute, even though the Cleveland's defense has been pretty good. 49ers favored by 7+ fantasy points. Ayuk, it's insane to see where he's at this season. We didn't have him this high, or we weren't drafting him this high. I wish I had more shares of Brandon Ayuk, to be completely honest, but Brandon Ayuk is here as our wide receiver 13. Our wide receiver 14 is going to be Devontae Smith, as Devontae Smith goes up against the Jets. 10.5 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in half PPR. We then move on to our next player, which is going to be Chris Olave. We just put out a video yesterday talking about how you should be going to trade for Chris Olave. 10.1 points. We don't know this toe toe injury, what the quarterback situation is, but having him here as our wide receiver 15 feels great. Going forward, I think Chris Olave gets back into being a back end wide receiver 1. Excited for Chris Olave. My next player then is going to be Jalen Waddle. Waddle. This Dolphins offense is electric. Jalen Waddle's been only averaging 9.7 points in half PPR, but they're going up against Carolina and no Devon. With this running game, what's that going to look like with just Raheem Mostert, with Jeff Wilson, and with Ahmed? I think that actually benefits Jalen Waddle because Jalen Waddle now goes back to being the second on the pecking order. Even though he might have always been the second on the pecking order, I think he's actually gets more target share this week. So I like Jalen Waddle here. And we're going to round our C tier out with Nico Collins. Nico Collins going up against New Orleans, 15.4 fantasy points in half PPR. We've been having him lower in past weeks, but based on just his absolute amazing production, we are having him here with the matchup in the C tier. We move to our D tier, and our D tier is pretty large. We have Garrett Wilson, Deebo Samuel, Mike Evans, Jordan Addison, Chris Godwin, DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman, Adam Thielen, and Amari Cooper. Now, when we're looking at this big D tier, Garrett Wilson and Deebo Samuel, just starting off, pretty easy for me with Garrett Wilson going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. They're going to have to throw the ball. Zach Wilson has started to look better each and every week. He is a wide receiver too. It's sad because we thought at this point, if he was with Aaron Rodgers, we might have him in our A tier, but Garrett Wilson is right here as wide receiver 18. We then move to Deebo Samuel, who Deebo Samuel has kind of just given the role over to Brandon Ayuk. But 12.1 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in half PPR. It hasn't been great. We're hoping that it gets better, but I do like him here over some guys that we're going to talk about next. Then we go to Mike Evans, and this is where I feel like there maybe is a small gap between Mike Evans and Jordan Addison, where these first three guys are pretty close for me. Mike Evans is going up against Detroit. 15.4 fantasy points is what Mike Evans has been averaging the last few weeks before the bye. Mike Evans is looking like a league winner, and Baker Mayfield and him seem to have a very good connection, which is very good to have. Then we're going to move on to Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison is going up against Chicago, 10.5 fantasy points. You almost have to put these Minnesota Vikings pass catchers a little bit higher than you maybe like because of Justin Jefferson being down. Someone's going to have to catch passes. They're clearly not good enough. They're going to be throwing the ball. They're probably going to lose to Chicago, and it's like sirens are going off in Minnesota as we need to figure out what is happening with Kirk Cousins. Are they going to trade him? Still to be determined. Then we got Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin is going up against the Detroit Lions. We talked about how much we like Mike Evans, but Chris Godwin has steadily had a resurgence. The first few weeks were kind of low and behold for Chris Godwin, but now it's getting back up there. So I like Chris Godwin this week in this matchup. We move to our next guy in this tier, which is going to be DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is going up against Cincinnati. 12 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in half PPR. The spread's pretty close for Cincinnati versus Seattle, so I think it's going to be a good game. Then we move to Michael Pittman Jr., getting the ball thrown to him by Gardner Minshew. If it was A-Rich in this matchup, Michael Pittman probably is at the beginning of this tier, if not making it into the C tier, but just due to Gardner Minshew being the starting quarterback this week, I couldn't really push him any higher. Then we got Adam Thielen and Amari Cooper. Adam Thielen, old man syndrome, been balling out, 15.8 fantasy points in half PPR, going up against Miami. This is really just, he's getting the volume, he's getting the targets, he's a wide receiver 1 for the Carolina Panthers. You got to put him here. And then kind of rounding this out, we then have Amari Cooper. And I know PJ Washington is starting this week. I know Deshaun Watson isn't starting this week, but my man's proven that he can get open. And if DTR was going to be starting this week, of course, Amari Cooper's probably down. We're probably putting Amari Cooper in like our E tier. Just not based on the talent, just based on the quarterback situation. PJ Washington has won some games when he's been a backup, so I think Amari Cooper should be fine this week with PJ Washington. So I have Amari Cooper here in our D tier. It's not great. We're not pushing him up. We're not saying, yeah, he's in our C tier, but I do like Amari Cooper here rounding out this tier. We move to our next tier, and we got the E tier. We got Zay Flowers, DeAndre Hopkins, Jacoby Myers, Hollywood Brown, Christian Kirk, T. Higgins, and Gabe Davis. Walking through all of this, we got Zay Flowers versus Tennessee. 9.5 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in half PPR. We're really just putting him here because of the upside. We've seen the ability, the Antonio Brown-like ability for this guy to get open. Lamar Jackson continues to fumble the ball, have turnover issues. If those turnovers are not happening, I think Zay Flowers' production is just continuing to go up. Then we go to DeAndre Hopkins, Tennessee Titans, wide receiver 1. The Tennessee Titans are going up against Baltimore. This is going to be an absolute slugfest, and I just don't think Derrick Henry, I don't think they're going to be able to get the ball rolling on the ground. So therefore, it's going to be a DeAndre Hopkins type day. We then move to Jacoby Myers with the Raiders, and the thing that we need to know about Jacoby Myers is they are going up against New England. This is like a bounce back game for my man, averaging 14.5 fantasy points in half PPR. Let's go get it. Jacoby Myers, like him this week. We then move to our next player, which is going to be Hollywood Brown. Has been on an absolute tear. I just have him here because I feel like I like the upside some of these guys ahead of him, but Hollywood Brown, safe floor. Then we move to Christian Kirk going up against Indianapolis Colts. Same reason I like Calvin Ridley. Maybe if Christian Kirk has another big day, maybe we need to start pulling Calvin Ridley lower in our rankings and pushing Christian Kirk back up, but I still feel like we're in week 6. We're still trying to figure figure out how these target shares, how these splits are going to be working. And so that's why I have Christian Kirk down here. Then we move to T. Higgins, which is looking like T. Higgins is going to play this week as they go up against Seattle. Joe Burrow's getting back to health. Jamar Chase looked absolutely dynamite without T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins, I don't feel great starting him, but I feel like if he's playing, you probably don't have any better option to slot in at your flex. So definitely go start some T. Higgins. We then moved to big boom or bust Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis just getting off that London game last week where he had a pretty good day. Gabe Davis had a pretty good day in the London game, but Gabe Davis is going against the Giants. So we have to have Stephon Diggs. We have to have Gabe Davis. These Bills weapons get a little bit of a bump because of the terrible offense. I mean, if you're playing the Broncos, you're playing the Giants. Those defenses suck. So you're going to be starting some of these players. We then move to our F tier, and this is where we're rounding out this video. We got Christian Watson, Tyler Lockett, and Terry McLaurin. I think Tyler Lockett, it's hard for me because I talked about how he's a trade target this week. You could definitely be pushing Tyler Lockett higher if you really, really wanted to. I'm just playing it safe here with Tyler Lockett, and then Christian Watson, Terry McLaurin, 2 wide receiver ones on their team. You got Terry McLaurin going up against Atlanta, and it's just hard for us to really start Terry McLaurin. Christian Watson, I feel like he's definitely a flex play, but it seems like based on last week, we need to see this Packers offense really start to get the ball rolling. So if you like the video, if you like those tiers, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button. If you have more questions or want to talk in those tiers, any start sit question, any running back wide receiver start sit question, any trade question, ask me down below. Appreciate you guys. Putting out another video tomorrow, talking about some stash players you should be stashing before week 7 fantasy football, so you don't have to fight for those guys on waivers. But appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.